They said a man born in chains could never wear a badge. But in 1871 Mississippi, Josiah Holt did just that, a former slave turned sheriff, standing alone between freedom and the flames of hate. When the Klan lynched a young farmer and burned Josiah's church, with his wife trapped inside, the law he'd sworn to uphold turned to ash. By day, he enforced peace. By night, he hunted riders through the pine woods, one by one. Folks whispered the Klan feared only two things: God's judgment and the sheriff who delivered it early. But power changes a man, and when justice starts to look like revenge, even the righteous begin to lose their way. Because in Marston County, the only thing more terrifying than the Klan's terror was the man who vowed to end it. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The last sliver of daylight painted Marston County in shades of rust and amber. Josiah Holt stood before his forge, watching the coals burn low. Sweat dripped from his brow as he hammered a final horseshoe into shape. The metal rang clear and true. He set down his tools and wiped his hands on his leather apron. Behind him, the small cabin glowed with lamplight. Through the open window, he could hear Ellen's voice, soft and patient. She was teaching the children their letters. 5 young voices repeated after her, stumbling over the sounds. Josiah smiled. His wife had a gift for turning confusion into understanding. He crossed the dirt yard and stepped inside. The smell of cornbread and beans filled the room. Ellen stood at the table, pointing to words chalked on a slate board. The children sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes bright with concentration. "That's enough for tonight," Ellen said gently. "Go on home before dark catches you." The children gathered their things and filed out, calling their thanks. Ellen turned to Josiah and brushed a streak of soot from his cheek. Her touch was warm. "Hungry?" she asked. "Always." They sat together at the table. The cornbread was still warm. Josiah broke off a piece and chewed slowly, savoring the simple comfort of food and home. These quiet moments felt like treasures. During the war, he had dreamed of nights like this, peaceful, ordinary, free. Ellen poured him coffee. "You finish those shoes for Mr. Patterson?" "All 6. He'll pick them up tomorrow." She nodded, spooning beans onto his plate. "Good. We could use the money before winter." Josiah was about to answer when fists pounded against the door. 3 hard knocks that shook the frame. Ellen's smile vanished. Josiah stood and moved toward the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle mounted above it. He opened the door. A boy stood there, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. Isaac Turner. Barely 12 years old. His shirt was torn and his face streaked with dirt. "Mr. Holt," Isaac gasped. "They took Caleb. Masked men on horses. They took my brother." Josiah felt his stomach tighten. "When?" "Just before sundown. He was loading our wagon with cotton. They rode up and dragged him off." "Please, Mr. Holt, please." Josiah grabbed his rifle and checked the load. Ellen appeared at his shoulder, her hand on his arm. "Be careful," she whispered. He kissed her forehead and stepped into the night. The pine thickets stretched dark and deep beyond the main road. Josiah rode hard, following Isaac's directions. The boy had pointed toward the old Garrett property, a burned-out plantation that had been abandoned since the war. Josiah knew the place. Everyone did. It was where secrets went to die. His horse picked through the trees, hooves crunching on fallen needles. Moonlight filtered through the branches in thin silver threads. Then Josiah saw it, a clearing ahead, and the silhouette of a man hanging from a low oak limb. He dismounted and ran forward. Caleb Turner swung gently in the breeze, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. The rope was fresh hemp, tied with military precision. Josiah's hands shook as he cut the body down and laid it on the ground. Caleb's eyes stared at nothing. He was barely 20 years old, newly married, proud of his first cotton harvest as a free man. Josiah knelt beside him and closed those dead eyes. His throat burned with rage so fierce it felt like swallowing fire. Then he saw the tracks. Buggy wheels pressed deep into the mud near the tree. Fresh tracks, narrow and distinctive. Josiah had seen those wheels before. They belonged to Sheriff Earl Dixon's buggy. He stood and looked around the clearing. Boot prints everywhere. At least 6 men. They had stood here and watched, and the sheriff had been among them. Josiah mounted his horse and rode straight for the courthouse. The building stood at the center of Marston, a 2-story structure of whitewashed wood. Light burned in the sheriff's office on the first floor. Josiah tied his horse and walked up the steps. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open. Sheriff Earl Dixon looked up from his desk, whiskey glass halfway to his lips. He was a thick man with gray stubble and eyes like dirty ice. A Confederate saber hung on the wall behind him. "What the hell do you think you're doing, boy?" Dixon growled. Josiah stepped inside. "Caleb Turner is dead, hanged by masked riders. Your buggy tracks were at the scene." Dixon set down his glass slowly. "That's so? I want justice." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Justice!" He tasted the word like it was poison. "Listen here, Josiah. I don't care what uniform you wore or what your Yankee friends told you. This is still the South. And in the South, we handle our own business. You call murder business?" Dixon smiled. It was a cruel, thin expression. "I call it mob business. Not my concern. Now get out of my office before I arrest you for trespassing." Josiah's hands tightened around his rifle. "You stood there and watched." "Prove it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Josiah felt something break inside him. All the restraint, all the patience he had built over years of discipline, it cracked like thin ice. "You're not the law," Josiah said quietly. "You're a coward hiding behind a badge." Dixon stood, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. "Boy, you just made a mistake. The only mistake was thinking men like you could change." Dixon's smile widened. "Get out, and pray you make it home." Josiah turned and walked out. His hands were trembling. His vision blurred red at the edges. He mounted his horse and rode toward home. But he didn't make it far. They came out of the shadows near the edge of town. 5 riders in white hoods, their horses circling him like wolves. Josiah tried to raise his rifle, but a rope snared his arm. He was dragged from his saddle and hit the ground hard. Boots kicked his ribs. Fists struck his face. He tasted blood and dirt. Someone laughed. A high, cruel sound. They hauled him up and threw him across a horse. The world spun. He heard the creak of saddle leather and the thunder of hooves. Then they dumped him in a ditch. Josiah lay still, every breath a knife in his chest. Above him, the oak tree loomed, the same tree where Caleb had died. The rope still hung from the branch, swaying in the wind. Darkness swallowed him whole. When Josiah opened his eyes, he saw wooden rafters and the flicker of candlelight. Pain radiated through his body. His ribs screamed with every breath. His face felt swollen and wrong. A cool cloth touched his forehead. He turned his head and saw Reverend Moses Carter sitting beside the cot. His weathered face creased with worry. "Easy now," the Reverend said softly. "You're safe. You're in the church." Josiah tried to sit up, but the pain forced him back down. "How long?" 3 days. We found you in that ditch half dead. Thought we'd lost you." Josiah closed his eyes. 3 days. Caleb's body was probably buried by now. Isaac was alone, and Sheriff Dixon still wore his badge. "Dixon's law protects killers," Reverend Carter said quietly. "Always has. You can't fight that alone, Josiah." The Reverend stood and brought a basin of water. He held it up so Josiah could see his reflection. The face staring back was bruised purple and black. One eye was swollen shut. His lip was split down the middle, but his other eye burned clear and hard. Josiah stared at that reflection and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "If the law won't stand for us, I will." Morning light crept through the church windows in pale golden streams. Dust floated in the beams like tiny ghosts. Josiah lay on the cot, his body stiff with pain. Every muscle ached. His ribs felt like broken glass, grinding together with each breath. He heard voices outside, wagon wheels creaking, horses snorting, the sound of boots hitting packed earth. Reverend Carter appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. Federal marshals just rode into town. A whole company of them. Josiah pushed himself upright. The room tilted. He gripped the edge of the cot and waited for his vision to clear. How many? 10, maybe 12. They're heading straight for the courthouse. Josiah stood on shaking legs. Pain shot through his ribs, but he gritted his teeth and moved toward the door. The Reverend tried to stop him, but Josiah brushed past. He had to see this. The street outside was already filling with people. White townsfolk gathered in clusters, whispering nervously. Freedmen stood apart, hope flickering in their faces. Josiah limped down the church steps and joined the crowd. The federal marshals sat tall in their saddles, blue uniforms crisp and clean. Their leader was a man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face. He wore a colonel's insignia. Beside him rode younger officers with hard eyes and hands resting on their pistols. The marshals dismounted outside the courthouse. Their boots struck the wooden steps in unison. The door swung open, and Sheriff Dixon stepped out, his hand already on his gun. "What's the meaning of this?" Dixon demanded. The colonel pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Earl Dixon, you are under arrest for aiding and abetting criminal activity, specifically conspiracy with known members of the Ku Klux Klan in the murder of Caleb Turner and assault on Josiah Holt." Dixon's face turned red. "That's horse shit. You got no authority here. This warrant says otherwise. Signed by a federal judge in Washington." Dixon drew his pistol. The marshals responded instantly, rifles snapping up to their shoulders. The crowd gasped and scattered. Josiah stayed where he was, watching through his one good eye. "Put the weapon down," the colonel said calmly, "or we'll put you down." Dixon's hand trembled. Sweat beaded on his forehead. For a moment, it looked like he might pull the trigger. Then, his shoulders sagged. He lowered the gun and let it drop to the ground. Two marshals moved forward and seized him. They clamped irons around his wrists. Dixon cursed and spat, but they dragged him down the steps and threw him into the back of a wagon. The colonel turned to address the crowd. His eyes scanned the faces until they landed on Josiah. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. "Josiah Holt," the colonel called out. "Step forward." Josiah limped through the crowd. People parted around him. When he reached the courthouse steps, the colonel smiled. "I'll be damned. You look like hell, Holt." "Colonel Pierce," Josiah said quietly. Pierce descended the steps and gripped Josiah's shoulder. "You served under me at Vicksburg. Best scout I ever had. Never missed a shot. Never questioned an order." He turned to the crowd. "This man saved Union lives. He earned his freedom in blood." The white townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. Some glared. Others looked away. Pierce lowered his voice. "What happened to your face?" "Klan riders. 3 nights ago." The colonel's jaw tightened. He looked back at Dixon, now chained in the wagon. Then he looked at the empty courthouse. "This county needs a sheriff, someone who understands the law, someone who won't look the other way when men commit murder." Josiah felt his pulse quicken. Pierce reached into his coat and pulled out a brass star. The badge gleamed in the sunlight. "By federal authority, I am appointing you interim sheriff of Marston County, effective immediately." The world seemed to stop. Josiah stared at the badge. It was small and simple, but it carried the weight of everything he had ever wanted: justice, authority, the power to protect his people. He took the badge. It felt warm in his palm. The crowd erupted. White men shouted in fury. Someone threw a rock that clattered against the courthouse wall. A woman shrieked that it was an abomination. Store owners began closing their doors, slamming shutters, locking windows. But the freedmen cheered. They clapped and hollered. An old man near the back raised his fist and shouted, "Glory!" Pierce handed Josiah the keys to the sheriff's office. "You've got your work cut out for you, Holt. But if any man can do it, it's you." Josiah nodded. He couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. The marshals mounted their horses. Dixon's wagon rolled away, heading north toward the federal garrison. The colonel tipped his hat to Josiah and rode off with his men. Slowly, the crowd dispersed. White townsfolk retreated to their homes and shops, muttering threats and promises of resistance. The freedmen lingered, shaking Josiah's hand, touching the badge, whispering prayers of thanks. By midday, Josiah stood alone in the sheriff's office. Dixon's whiskey bottle still sat on the desk. The saber still hung on the wall. Josiah walked to the weapon and lifted it down. He carried it outside and threw it into the dirt. Then he went home. Ellen was waiting on the porch. She saw the badge in his hand and covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. She pulled him inside and made him sit while she prepared a hot meal. They ate in silence, the weight of the day settling between them. That night, as darkness gathered outside, Ellen took the badge from the table. Josiah stood still while she pinned it to his coat. Her fingers were steady. She smoothed the fabric and stepped back to look at him. "You got what you wanted, Josiah," she said softly. He met her eyes. The badge felt heavier now than it had in the sunlight. Not yet. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Josiah pushed open the door to the sheriff's office. The hinges groaned. Inside, the room smelled of stale tobacco and old wood. Two white deputies stood by the desk, already waiting for him. The taller one was Buck Hensley, a heavy-set man with a drooping mustache. The other was Jim Garrett, lean and weathered, with cold eyes that never blinked. They watched Josiah cross the threshold like men watching a snake enter their home. "Morning," Josiah said. Neither man responded. Josiah walked to the desk and set down his rifle. He opened the top drawer and found Dixon's old logbook. The pages were mostly blank. Arrests rarely recorded. Crimes ignored. He closed it and looked at the two deputies. "We got work to do. Klan riders are still out there. Men who killed Caleb Turner. Men who beat me half to death. I aim to bring them in." Buck Hensley spat on the floor. "Like hell you will." Josiah stayed calm. "You got a problem with the law?" "I got a problem with you," Buck said. He unpinned his badge and threw it on the desk. The metal clinked against the wood. "I ain't taking orders from no—" "Get out," Josiah interrupted. Buck's face reddened. "What did you say to me?" "I said get out. You're fired." Jim Garrett stepped forward. "You can't fire us. We was hired by Sheriff Dixon." "Dixon's in chains. I'm sheriff now, and you just quit. Both of you. So walk out that door before I throw you out." Buck's hand moved toward his belt. Josiah's hand dropped to his pistol. The room went still. Buck's eyes flicked to the gun at Josiah's side, then back to his face. Whatever he saw there made him think twice. He turned and walked to the door. Jim Garrett followed. At the threshold, Buck paused and looked back. "This won't last. You hear me? It won't last." Then they were gone. Josiah stood alone in the office. He exhaled slowly and holstered his pistol. The silence felt heavy. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Samuel Wade standing in the doorway. Wade was a thin man in his 30s, with sun-bleached hair and tired eyes. He wore a Union coat, faded but clean. He'd fought at Shiloh and Chattanooga. Josiah had seen him around town, but never spoken to him much. Wade looked at the 2 badges on the desk. "Guess that leaves just me." "You staying?" Josiah asked. Wade nodded. "I didn't come back from the war to watch cowards run this county. I'll stay." Josiah studied him. Wade's eyes were steady. Honest, maybe. Or maybe just tired of fighting. Either way, Josiah needed men he could trust. "All right," Josiah said. "Get your gear. We got rounds to make." By noon, Josiah had recruited 3 more men. They met in the back room of Reverend Carter's church. Nathan Briggs was the first to arrive. He was broad-shouldered and quiet, with scars running down his neck from a saber wound at Cold Harbor. He'd been a sergeant in the colored infantry. He didn't smile much, but his handshake was firm. "You need men who can shoot," Briggs said. "I can shoot." Reuben Fields came next. He was younger than the others, maybe 25, with quick eyes and a sharp tongue. He'd served as a scout like Josiah. He leaned against the wall and grinned. About time somebody put fear in them white robes. The last man was Isaac Turner, Caleb's brother. He was tall and thin, with grief carved into his face. When he shook Josiah's hand, his grip trembled. "I want justice for my brother," Isaac said quietly. "You'll get it," Josiah promised. He gave each man a badge and a rifle. They took an oath in the church, hands raised, voices steady. Reverend Carter spoke the words, and they repeated them. When it was done, Josiah looked at his new deputies and felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The next week, they patrolled the roads. They rode in pairs, rifles across their laps, watching the tree lines. They escorted children to the schoolhouse. They arrested a man named Cyrus Webb for burning a freedman's barn. They found 2 Klansmen drinking in a saloon and dragged them to jail in chains. The white townsfolk grew angrier each day. Store owners refused to sell to Josiah's men. Women crossed the street to avoid them. But the violence stopped. The night riders disappeared. The county grew quieter. One afternoon, a mob gathered outside the jail. 30 men, maybe more. They carried torches and clubs. They wanted Cyrus Webb released. They shouted that no black sheriff had the right to jail a white man. Josiah stepped onto the jailhouse porch. His deputies flanked him, rifles ready. The mob fell silent. "Cyrus Webb is charged with arson," Josiah said. "He'll see a judge. Until then, he stays locked up." A man in the front raised a club. "You got no authority here, boy." Josiah drew his pistol and fired into the air. The shot cracked like thunder. The mob flinched. Some stumbled backward. The man with the club dropped it and ran. "Next shot goes lower," Josiah said. "Go home." The crowd broke apart. Men scattered down the street, cursing and shouting threats. But they left. Josiah holstered his pistol and went back inside. That night, Ellen met him at the door. She looked at his face and touched his cheek. "I heard what you did. Had to be done. I'm proud of you, Josiah." Her voice was soft. "But I'm afraid too. They'll come for you next." He pulled her close. She rested her head against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim light of the kitchen. Later, they knelt together beside the bed. Ellen folded her hands and closed her eyes. Josiah bowed his head. She prayed aloud, asking for protection and strength. Josiah listened to her voice and felt his own heart grow heavy. When she finished, they climbed into bed. Ellen reached for the lamp and turned the wick down. The flame shrank. The room darkened. Just before the light went out, Josiah heard it. Hooves, many of them, distant but growing closer. The sound rolled through the night like distant thunder. Ellen froze. Her hand hovered over the lamp. She looked at Josiah. His jaw tightened. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. They surrounded the house. Shadows moved past the windows. The screen door rattled once. Then everything went still. Ellen extinguished the lamp. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear. Dawn stretched across Marston County like a pale hand, bringing light but no warmth. Josiah rose before Ellen and dressed in silence. He strapped on his pistol and checked the chambers. 6 rounds. He slipped his knife into his boot and pulled on his coat. Ellen woke and watched him from the bed. "It's the Lord's Day, Josiah." "I know. You bringing that gun to church?" "I am." She sat up slowly. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. She understood. The riders had circled their house 2 nights before. They hadn't struck yet, but they would. It was only a matter of time. They dressed together and walked the dirt road toward the church. Other families joined them along the way. Freedmen in their Sunday clothes, children scrubbed clean, women carrying Bibles wrapped in cloth. They greeted Josiah with quiet respect. Some touched his arm as they passed, others simply nodded. The church stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. White paint peeled from the boards. The steps creaked under their weight. Inside, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the pews. Reverend Carter stood at the pulpit, arranging his notes. He looked up when Josiah entered and offered a small smile. "Morning, Sheriff." "Reverend." Josiah positioned himself near the doorway. He could see the road from there. His deputies were stationed outside, watching the tree line. Nathan Briggs stood beneath an oak tree, rifle in hand. Reuben Fields leaned against the fence, eyes scanning the horizon. Samuel Wade sat on his horse near the road, relaxed but alert. Ellen moved to the front of the church where the children gathered. She opened a hymnal and began teaching them the words to "Amazing Grace." Her voice was soft and clear. The children repeated after her, stumbling over the syllables, giggling when they got it wrong. She smiled and encouraged them, patient as always. The service began. Families filled the pews. Reverend Carter opened his Bible and read from the book of Exodus. His voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the words. He spoke about Moses leading his people out of bondage. He spoke about faith and deliverance. The congregation murmured their agreement. Then the children sang. Ellen stood beside them, her hands clasped in front of her. Her face glowed in the morning light. Josiah watched her from the doorway and felt something tighten in his chest. She was so beautiful, so good, everything he wasn't. The hymn swelled. Voices joined together, filling the small church with sound. Outside, birds scattered from the trees. A dog barked in the distance. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. Then the blast came. It was a deep, thunderous sound that shook the walls. The windows rattled. Someone screamed. Josiah spun toward the door and saw flames climbing the side of the church. Orange and red, moving fast, eating the dry wood like a living thing. "Fire!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted. People leaped from the pews. Children cried out. Reverend Carter tried to calm them, but his voice was drowned by the rising panic. Smoke began pouring through the cracks in the walls. The air grew thick and hot. Josiah ran to the nearest window and smashed it with the butt of his pistol. Glass shattered. Fresh air rushed in, but it only fed the flames. They roared louder, spreading across the roof. "Out! Everyone out!" Josiah shouted. He grabbed an old woman by the arm and pushed her toward the broken window. She climbed through, coughing. He turned and saw a man frozen in fear, staring at the fire. Josiah shoved him forward. "Move!" People scrambled toward the exits. The front door jammed. Bodies pressed against it, screaming. Josiah forced his way through the crowd and kicked the door open. It swung wide and people poured out, gasping and coughing, stumbling into the yard. Smoke filled Josiah's lungs. He bent low, squinting through the haze. He could barely see. The heat was unbearable. Sweat poured down his face. He heard children crying somewhere to his left and moved toward the sound. He found 3 of them huddled beneath a pew, Too scared to move, he scooped up 2 in his arms and yelled at the third to follow. They ran toward the door together. Outside, hands reached in and pulled the children to safety. Josiah turned back. The smoke was thicker now, black and choking. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and pushed deeper into the church. People were still inside. He could hear them coughing, calling for help. He found Reverend Carter helping an elderly man toward the window. Josiah took the man's other arm, and they lifted him through together. The Reverend coughed hard, his face streaked with soot. "Get out, Josiah." "Not yet." Josiah moved through the smoke, calling out. He found a woman collapsed near the altar and dragged her to the door. Outside, Nathan Briggs pulled her from his arms and carried her away. Josiah went back in. The roof groaned. Beams cracked overhead. Flames licked across the ceiling, hungry and wild. The heat was suffocating. Josiah's eyes burned. He could barely breathe. Then he realized. Ellen. He spun around, searching through the smoke. "Ellen!" No answer. "Ellen!" He stumbled forward, coughing violently. The smoke was too thick. He couldn't see anything. He dropped to his knees and crawled, feeling his way along the floor. That's when he saw her. She was pinned beneath a fallen beam near the front of the church. The wood had collapsed from the ceiling and trapped her legs. She wasn't moving. "Ellen!" Josiah scrambled toward her. He grabbed the beam and pulled. It didn't budge. He pulled again, harder, his muscles screaming. The beam shifted slightly, but not enough. Ellen's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him through the smoke. Her face was pale. Blood trickled from her temple. "Josiah," she whispered. "I got you. Hold on." He braced his feet and heaved with everything he had. The beam lifted an inch, 2 inches, but the moment he tried to pull her free, it slipped from his grip and crashed back down. Ellen cried out in pain. "No!" Josiah's voice cracked. He tried again, his hands raw and bleeding. Ellen reached up and touched his face. Her fingers were cold. "The children," she said softly. "Are they out?" "Don't talk. Save your strength." "Are they out, Josiah?" He looked into her eyes. "Yes, they're safe." She smiled. A small, tired smile. "Then go. Before the roof falls. I'm not leaving you. You have to." "No. Josiah." Her voice was firm now. She gripped his hand. "You have to live. You hear me? You have to live and finish this." Tears streamed down his face. Not from the smoke. From something deeper. Something breaking inside him. The roof groaned again. A section collapsed behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. The flames were everywhere now. The entire church was burning. Ellen squeezed his hand one last time. "I love you." Then her eyes closed. "Ellen." Josiah shook her. "Ellen, wake up! Wake up!" Hands grabbed him from behind. Nathan Briggs and Reuben Fields dragged him backward. He fought them, screaming her name, reaching for her. But they pulled him out into the yard and held him down as he thrashed and wept. The church collapsed 20 minutes later. The walls caved inward. The steeple toppled. Flames shot into the sky, black smoke billowing upward like a pillar of grief. When the fire finally died, Josiah walked through the ashes. His boots crunched on charred wood. He found Ellen's body beneath the rubble. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping. He knelt beside her and touched her face. It was still warm. A hand touched his shoulder. Reverend Carter stood behind him, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, Josiah." Josiah didn't answer. He couldn't speak. His throat was closed. His chest felt hollow. Then he saw it. A charred plank, leaning against the remains of the altar. Words had been burned into the wood with a branding iron. "This is your law, Sheriff." Josiah stared at the message. His vision blurred. His hands curled into fists. By nightfall, the survivors gathered in the rain. They stood in the mud near the ruined church, silent and grieving. Josiah stood before them, Ellen's scorched shawl clutched in his hand. The rain soaked through his clothes. Lightning split the sky. He looked at their faces. Old men, young women, children who had lost their mothers, all of them waiting for him to speak. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, cold, harder than iron. "I will bury every man behind that hood." No one responded. They didn't need to. They saw the truth in his eyes. Josiah turned and walked toward his horse. He mounted and sat there for a moment, staring at the burned church. Thunder rolled across the sky. Rain poured down. Then he turned the horse toward the darkness and rode. The dawn broke gray and cold. Josiah stood in front of the ruined church, staring at the blackened timbers. Smoke still rose from the ashes. The smell of burned wood hung in the air. He had not slept, had not eaten, had not spoken to anyone since the night before. Nathan Briggs approached from behind. He carried 2 rifles over his shoulder. "Sheriff?" Josiah didn't turn around. "Clear the altar. Bring me a table." Nathan hesitated. "The altar's all that's left standing. I know what's left. Do it." By midday, the space beneath the remaining roof beams had been transformed. A long wooden table stood where the congregation once prayed. Maps of Marston County covered its surface, marked with crosses and circles. Each cross represented a known clan member. Each circle marked a safe house or meeting place. Josiah stood over the maps with his deputies gathered around him. Reuben Fields, Isaac Turner, Nathan Briggs, all former soldiers, all willing to follow him into hell if he asked. "We move at night," Josiah said. His finger traced a road on the map. 3 patrol routes, north, south, and east. 2 men on each. You see riders, you don't wait for them to move. You stop them. You search them. If they're wearing hoods, you arrest them. "And if they resist?" Isaac asked. Josiah looked up. His eyes were empty. "Then you bury them." The men exchanged glances, but said nothing. "We'll use the church bells for signals," Josiah continued. 1 ring means trouble in town. 2 rings means riders spotted on the roads. 3 rings means everyone comes running. You hear 3 bells, you drop everything, and get here. He pointed to different spots on the map. "We'll place lanterns at these crossroads. Red glass means danger. White means all clear. You check the lanterns every hour." Nathan leaned forward. "What about the federal marshals? They gonna support this? They're stretched thin. We're on our own." Reuben frowned. "And the townspeople? They'll learn to trust the law again. Or they won't." Josiah rolled up one of the maps. "Either way, the killing stops." That afternoon, a woman arrived on horseback. She wore a dark riding coat and carried a leather satchel. Her hair was pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She dismounted and approached the ruined church with confident steps. Josiah met her at the entrance. "You're the journalist, Clara Jennings." She extended her hand. "I work for the New York Tribune." He shook it briefly. "You got my letter." "I did. And I want the full story." She pulled a notebook from her satchel. "Everything. Names, dates, locations. I'll print it all." Josiah led her inside. She looked around at the burned walls and the maps spread across the altar. Her expression didn't change. She'd seen worse. "These are the men responsible," Josiah said, pointing to the crosses on the map. "Landowners, shopkeepers, former Confederate officers. They meet every Thursday night at different locations. This week, they're gathering at the old Harmon plantation." Clara wrote quickly. "How do you know?" "I have people watching them, listening to them." Josiah's jaw tightened. "They don't hide as well as they think." "And you're planning to arrest them?" "Some of them." She looked up from her notebook. "What about the others?" He didn't answer. Clara studied him for a moment. "Sheriff, if you want the North to care about this, you need to give me facts, evidence, not just bodies. You'll get your evidence." Over the next 2 weeks, Josiah's patrols swept through the county like a scythe. They raided barns and found stockpiles of torches and robes. They stopped riders on dark roads and dragged them from their horses. Some were arrested. Others fought back and paid for it with their lives. Josiah's methods grew harsher. When they found a safe house in the woods, he ordered it burned to the ground. When they caught a clansman fleeing from a raid, Josiah had him hanged from the nearest tree, his body left swinging as a warning. The message was clear. The law had teeth now, and it would bite. Clara documented everything. She interviewed witnesses. She photographed the burned church. She wrote letters to her editors describing the terror that had gripped the county and the black sheriff who was fighting back. Her articles began appearing in northern papers, stirring outrage and debate. But not everyone approved. One evening, Reverend Carter came to the ruined church. He found Josiah alone, studying his maps by lantern light. The Reverend's face was drawn, tired. He looked like a man who had spent too many nights praying for a miracle. "Josiah," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Josiah didn't look up. "About what?" "About what you're doing." "I'm enforcing the law." "You're becoming what you hate." That made Josiah pause. He set down his pen and turned to face the Reverend. "Say that again." Reverend Carter stepped closer. "You're losing yourself, son. I see it in your eyes. You're not fighting for justice anymore. You're fighting for revenge. They killed her. I know. They burned her alive. I know." The Reverend's voice was gentle but firm. "And I grieve with you, Josiah. But Ellen wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you to lose your soul." Josiah's expression hardened. "I already buried it with her." The Reverend flinched. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. After a long silence, he simply nodded and walked away. Josiah watched him go. Then he returned to his maps. Late that night, he rode back to his empty home. The cabin felt cold without Ellen. Her clothes still hung on pegs by the door. Her books still sat on the shelf. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. He sat at the small table and pulled Ellen's wedding ring from his pocket. He had taken it from her hand before they buried her. It was a simple band of silver, worn smooth from years of wear. He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up his revolver and pressed the ring onto the grip, wedging it into place where his thumb would rest. He tested the weight. It felt right. "For you," he whispered. He rose and walked to the lamp. His shadow stretched long across the wall. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Josiah blew out the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. The afternoon sun hung low when Nathan Briggs kicked open the jailhouse door. His face was pale. Blood stained his sleeve. He stumbled inside, gripping the doorframe for support. Josiah looked up from his desk. "Nathan?" "Ambush." Nathan's voice came out hoarse. "At the Miller Creek Bridge. They were waiting for us." Josiah was on his feet instantly. "How many?" "At least a dozen riders. We didn't stand a chance." Nathan swayed. Josiah caught him by the arm and guided him to a chair. "Jacob and Thomas are dead. Shot before they could even draw their weapons." Josiah's jaw tightened. "Where's Reuben?" "Still at the bridge with Isaac, guarding the bodies." Nathan looked up, his eyes red. "Sheriff, they knew exactly where we'd be. Down to the minute." The words settled over the room like ice. Josiah moved to the window and stared out at the quiet street. His mind worked through the possibilities. 3 patrol routes. Only his deputies knew the schedules. Only his men knew which roads they'd take and when. Someone had talked. He turned back to Nathan. "Get yourself bandaged. Then find Reuben and Isaac. Tell them to bring the bodies back to town. We'll bury them proper." Nathan nodded and stood, wincing. "What are you going to do?" "Find out who sold us." After Nathan left, Josiah sat at his desk and pulled out the patrol logs. Each route was written in careful detail. Times, locations, the names of the men assigned to each shift. He studied the entries, looking for patterns, looking for anything that might point to a leak. The door opened again. Samuel Wade stepped inside, his hat in his hands. "Sheriff, I heard about the ambush. I'm sorry." Josiah didn't look up. "Where were you this afternoon?" Wade hesitated. "At the livery." "Why? Anyone see you there?" "I don't know. Maybe." Wade's voice grew defensive. "What's this about?" Josiah finally raised his eyes. "Someone told the Klan where my men would be. Someone gave them our patrol routes." Wade's face went pale. "You think I don't think anything yet, but I'm going to find out." Josiah stood and walked around the desk. "Empty your pockets." "Sheriff, this is—" "Empty them, now." Wade set his hat on the desk and slowly pulled items from his coat. A few coins, a pocket watch, a folded handkerchief. Nothing unusual. Josiah examined each item carefully. "Where do you keep your horse?" "The barn behind my boarding house. Same as always." "Show me." They walked through town in silence. Freedmen stopped to watch as Josiah and Wade passed. Word of the ambush had already spread. Faces were drawn, fearful. The thin thread of hope that had begun to grow in the county was fraying fast. Wade's boarding house sat at the edge of town. The barn behind it was small, barely big enough for 2 horses. Wade pushed open the door and gestured inside. "See for yourself." Josiah entered first. Isaac Turner was already there, crouched in the corner near a pile of hay. He looked up when Josiah walked in. His expression was dark. "Found something, Sheriff." Josiah crossed to him. Isaac held up a small bundle of papers, tied with twine. They'd been hidden beneath a loose board in the floor. Wade took a step back. "I don't know what those are." Josiah untied the bundle. The papers were letters, short messages written in careful script. He read the first one aloud. "Patrol heading north on Thursday evening. 3 men. Miller Creek Bridge at sundown." He read another. "Sheriff planning raid on Harmon Plantation. Friday night. 6 men." Each letter detailed patrol routes, raid plans, and deputy assignments. Each one bore Wade's handwriting. Isaac stood slowly. His hand moved to his pistol. Wade raised his hands. "Wait. Let me explain." Josiah looked at him. His voice was quiet, controlled. "Explain." "I never wanted anyone to die." Wade's words came out in a rush. "I just wanted to prevent bloodshed. If they knew where you'd be, they could avoid you. No one would have to fight. No one would get hurt. 2 men are dead. I didn't know they'd ambush you. I swear, I thought—" "You thought what?" Josiah stepped closer. "That the Klan would just run away? That they'd leave us alone if we gave them enough room?" Wade's voice cracked. "I was trying to keep the peace. You were trying to save your own skin." Josiah grabbed Wade by the collar and dragged him out of the barn. "You're done hiding." They marched through the streets toward the courthouse. People emerged from shops and homes, following. By the time they reached the courthouse steps, a crowd had gathered. Freedmen, white townsfolk. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Josiah threw Wade to the ground at the base of the steps. Wade landed hard, his hands scraping against the dirt. He tried to stand, but Josiah placed a boot on his back. "This man," Josiah called out, his voice carrying across the square, "gave our patrol routes to the Klan. 2 deputies are dead because of him." The crowd stirred. Angry voices rose from the freedmen. The white townsfolk remained silent, watching. Josiah pulled out the letters and held them up. "These are his words, his handwriting. He confessed to me not 10 minutes ago." Wade twisted beneath Josiah's boot. "I was trying to help." "Help who?" Josiah pressed down harder. "The men who burned our church? The men who lynched Caleb Turner? The men who murdered my wife?" Wade's face went red. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." "Then confess. Tell everyone what you did." Wade's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Josiah reached down and grabbed the badge pinned to Wade's coat. He ripped it free, tearing the fabric. He held it up for the crowd to see, then hurled it into the dirt. "You're no lawman," Josiah said. "You're a coward and a traitor. He drew his revolver and pressed it against the back of Wade's head. The crowd went silent. Reuben stepped forward from the edge of the square. "Sheriff!" Josiah didn't look at him. His finger rested on the trigger. Ellen's wedding ring pressed cold against his thumb. Wade began to weep. "Please, please, I'm sorry." For a long moment, Josiah stood frozen. The weight of the gun. The weight of the choice. He could feel the crowd watching, waiting. He pulled the hammer back. Then he lowered the gun. "Get out of my county," Josiah said. "If I see you again, I'll hang you myself." Wade scrambled to his feet. He stumbled down the street, not looking back. The freedmen cheered. They raised their fists and shouted Josiah's name. Justice had been served. But Josiah's deputies didn't cheer. Nathan, Reuben, and Isaac stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces grim. They had seen something in Josiah's eyes, something that frightened them. Wade reached the edge of town and glanced back once. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon. He turned toward the swamp and disappeared into the trees, muttering under his breath, "You'll regret this, Sheriff." Rain hammered the jailhouse roof like gunfire. Josiah sat at his desk, studying the map spread before him. A week had passed since Wade's banishment, a week of tense patrols and sleepless nights. The county held its breath, waiting for the next strike. The door opened. A boy no older than 12 rushed inside, soaked to the bone. He held out a sealed envelope. "From Miss Jennings, sir." Josiah took the letter and handed the boy a coin. The child disappeared back into the storm. Josiah broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Clara's handwriting was urgent, almost frantic. "Sheriff Holt. Urgent intelligence received. Grand Dragon meeting tomorrow night at Boone Plantation Ruins. Multiple riders confirmed. Federal marshals en route, but won't arrive until week's end. Please wait for backup. Do not engage alone." C.J. Josiah read it twice. Then he struck a match and held the corner of the paper to the flame. He watched it curl and blacken, turning to ash in his palm. Nathan entered from the back room, shaking water from his coat. "What was that?" "A chance," Josiah said. He stood and moved to the weapons cabinet. "Get Reuben and Isaac. Tell them to meet here at sundown." "What's happening?" "We're ending this tonight." Nathan's eyes widened. "Sheriff, we should—" "I didn't ask for advice." Josiah pulled out rifles and began checking each one. "Get the men. That's an order." Nathan hesitated, then nodded and left. The rain continued through the afternoon. By evening, it had settled into a steady downpour that turned the roads to mud and the fields to swamps. Perfect weather for what Josiah had planned. The darkness would hide them. The rain would muffle their approach. His 3 remaining deputies gathered in the jailhouse as the sun disappeared behind black clouds. Reuben carried extra ammunition. Isaac brought rope and kerosene. They didn't ask questions. They knew better now. Josiah distributed the rifles. "Boone Plantation, 2 miles east. The clan's meeting there tonight. We hit them hard and fast. No prisoners." Isaac looked up sharply. "No prisoners?" "You heard me." Reuben shifted his weight. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "I didn't bring you here to debate." Josiah's voice was cold, final. "You're either with me or you're not. Choose now." The 3 deputies exchanged glances. Nathan was the first to nod. Then Isaac. Finally, Reuben. "Good," Josiah said. He picked up his rifle and checked the action. Ellen's wedding ring gleamed on the grip. "Let's ride." They moved through the rain like ghosts. The horses' hooves were muffled by mud and thunder. Lightning split the sky every few minutes, illuminating the ruined plantation in brief flashes. The main house still stood, its windows dark and empty. The slave quarters had been burned long ago, leaving only charred foundations. Josiah signaled for the men to spread out. They dismounted 100 yards from the house and approached on foot. Lantern light flickered in the upper windows. Shadows moved inside. Voices carried faintly through the storm. He counted at least 15 horses tied near the entrance, maybe 20 men inside. The odds didn't matter. They had surprise. They had fury. Josiah raised his hand, waited, then dropped it. Gunfire erupted across the cotton fields. Nathan fired first, his shot taking down a guard at the door. Reuben and Isaac opened up from the flanks, their bullets punching through windows and walls. Men inside screamed. Lanterns crashed to the floor. Flames began to spread. Riders burst from the house, some in robes, some half-dressed. They fired blindly into the darkness. Josiah picked them off one by one, his shots precise and methodical. A man fell clutching his throat. Another spun backward, dead before he hit the ground. The rain turned the dirt to red mud. Josiah reloaded and moved closer. He kicked open the front door and stepped inside. The main hall was chaos. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. The remaining Klansmen had barricaded themselves behind overturned furniture. They fired at him wildly. He dropped to one knee and returned fire. His first shot caught a man in the chest. His second shattered another's jaw. The hall filled with smoke and the smell of blood. Then he saw movement at the back of the room. A tall figure in white robes was climbing the stairs, trying to escape. Josiah crossed the hall in long strides, stepping over bodies. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The figure reached the upper landing and turned. Josiah raised his rifle. "Stop!" The man froze. His hands went up slowly. Josiah moved closer, keeping his rifle trained on the robed figure's chest. "Take it off." The man's voice was muffled beneath the hood. "You're making a mistake, Sheriff. The hood. Now." Trembling hands reached up and pulled the white fabric away. Josiah's breath caught. Judge Alistair Boone stared back at him. His silver hair was disheveled. His face was pale but composed. He looked almost dignified, even now. "Sheriff Holt," Boone said calmly. "I should have known." Josiah's finger tightened on the trigger. "You signed my freedom papers." "I did." "You presided over my wedding." "I remember." "You burned my wife alive." Boone's expression didn't change. "That was regrettable, but necessary. Order must be maintained." "Order." Josiah's voice was barely above a whisper. "You call lynching children order? You call burning churches order?" "I call it civilization," Boone said. "The natural hierarchy restored. You were given freedom, Josiah. You should have been grateful. Instead, you took power that was never meant for you." "My wife is dead because of you?" "Your wife died because you forgot your place." Josiah lowered the rifle until it pointed at Boone's heart. The judge didn't flinch. "If you kill me," Boone said, "you prove me right. You prove that your kind cannot be trusted with authority, that you are nothing but savages dressed in badges." "Maybe I am." Josiah pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the house. Boone stumbled backward, his hand going to his chest. Blood spread across his white shirt. He looked down at the wound, then back at Josiah, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You—" he gasped. His legs gave out. He collapsed against the wall and slid to the floor, leaving a red smear on the wallpaper. His breathing became wet and ragged. Then it stopped. Josiah stood over the body for a long moment. The rifle hung loose in his hands. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, emptiness. Footsteps on the stairs. Nathan, Reuben, and Isaac appeared, their faces streaked with soot and rain. They stared at Boone's corpse. "Jesus!" Reuben whispered. "Get the horses," Josiah said. "We're done here." They rode back through the storm in silence. Behind them, flames consumed what remained of the Boone plantation. The rain wasn't enough to stop the fire. By dawn, nothing would be left but ash. The next morning, the county woke to find broadsheets nailed to every door and post. Clara Jennings had worked through the night. Her article was already printed in northern papers, the ink still wet. "Black Sheriff breaks the Klan. Judge Boone unmasked as Grand Dragon Josiah Holt ends reign of terror. The freedmen celebrated in the streets. They sang hymns and shouted Josiah's name. For the first time since the war ended, they believed justice was possible. But the white townsfolk saw it differently. They gathered in angry clusters, their faces twisted with rage. By noon, a mob had formed outside the courthouse. They threw stones at the windows. They burned Josiah in effigy. They screamed for his head. Josiah stood on the courthouse steps, his coat still stained with blood from the night before. He watched the mob with cold eyes. His deputies flanked him, rifles ready. The crowd surged forward, then stopped. Federal cavalry rode into the square, 50 strong. Their blue uniforms were crisp. Their rifles gleamed. They formed a line between Josiah and the mob. Colonel Thaddeus Pierce dismounted and climbed the steps. His face was grim. He held a folded paper in his hand. "Sheriff Holt," he said quietly. Josiah turned to face him. "Colonel." Pierce unfolded the paper. His voice carried across the square. "By order of the Department of Justice, Sheriff Josiah Holt, you are hereby relieved of duty for extrajudicial killings and excessive use of force." The words hung in the air. Josiah looked at Pierce for a long moment. Then he unpinned the badge from his coat. He held it up so everyone could see. The metal caught the morning light. He let it fall. It hit the steps with a dull clang and rolled to a stop at Pierce's feet. "Justice doesn't need a badge," Josiah said. He walked down the steps and through the line of cavalry. The mob parted before him. No one dared move. Josiah walked away from the courthouse steps with the mob's hatred burning at his back. He didn't look at the cavalry, didn't acknowledge the freedmen who called his name. His deputies scattered like crows before a storm. Nathan disappeared into the crowd. Reuben mounted his horse and rode north without a word. Isaac stood frozen for a moment before turning away. They knew what was coming. They wanted no part of it. The walk home felt longer than it should have. Each step ground mud and blood deeper into his boots. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, heavy with the promise of more. People watched from windows. Some spat as he passed. Others pulled their children inside and locked their doors. His house appeared through the trees like a monument to everything he'd lost. The magnolia tree where Ellen was buried stood guard in the back. The forge sat cold and silent. The windows were dark. Then he saw the door. 3 letters carved deep into the wood. KKK. The cuts were fresh, the raw wood pale against the weathered grain. A noose hung from the porch beam, swaying gently in the breeze. The rope was new. White. Clean. They'd been here while he was at the courthouse, while the mob raged and the cavalry formed lines, while he dropped his badge and walked away. Josiah stood in his yard and stared at the message. His hand went to his rifle. Then he lowered it. What good would shooting a door do? What good would any of it do now? He pushed the door open. The house was empty but violated. Furniture overturned. Ellen's books scattered across the floor. Her teaching materials torn and scattered. The bed frame broken. Everything he'd built with her, everything they'd protected, reduced to wreckage. He picked up one of her books, a primer she'd used to teach children their letters. The pages were crumpled, but intact. He smoothed them carefully, his hands shaking. Night fell fast. He sat in the ruins of his home with his rifle across his knees, waiting. They came after midnight. Josiah heard them before he saw them. Horses, many of them, moving slowly through the darkness. Voices carried on the wind, laughter, the sound of glass breaking. He moved to the window and looked out. Torches. At least 20. They surrounded the house in a loose circle, their flames casting dancing shadows across the yard. Men in white robes. Some held rifles. Others carried kerosene. One stepped forward and called out, "Come out, Sheriff, or we burn you like we burned your woman." Josiah recognized the voice. Thomas Garrett, a farmer who'd protested his appointment. A coward who only found courage in crowds. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the back window, the one that faced the forest. He opened it slowly, carefully. The torches were all at the front. They expected him to fight, expected him to die defending his home like Ellen had died defending her church. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The first bottle of kerosene smashed through the front window. Flames erupted across the floor. More bottles followed, crashing through other windows. Fire spread fast, consuming curtains and furniture. Smoke filled the air. Josiah climbed through the back window and dropped into the garden. He moved low, staying in the shadows. Behind him, the house became an inferno. Shouts rose from the mob as they realized he wasn't inside. "Find him! Don't let the bastard escape!" Gunfire cracked through the night. Bullets tore through leaves and branches. Josiah ran deeper into the forest, his rifle clutched tight. A round clipped his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain exploded down his arm, but he kept moving. The forest swallowed him whole. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out. The sounds of pursuit faded behind him. The glow of his burning home dimmed through the trees. He stopped finally in a hollow between two massive oaks, collapsing against the trunk. Blood soaked his shirt from the shoulder wound. He pressed his hand against it, gritting his teeth. The bullet had passed through. Clean. Lucky. He laughed bitterly at the thought. Lucky. Days blurred together in the wilderness. Josiah moved from hollow to hollow, never staying in one place more than a night. He built no fires, left no tracks, survived on creek water and wild berries. Once he stole rations from a farmhouse while the family slept. The county spread word that he'd gone rogue, that he was a killer and a fugitive, that anyone who helped him would hang beside him. Wanted posters appeared on trees, his face sketched in crude ink, the reward high enough to tempt desperate men. Both sides hunted him now. The clan wanted revenge. The law wanted order. He belonged to neither. In a deep hollow near a creek, Josiah found an abandoned hunter's shelter, just 4 walls of stacked stone and a roof of pine branches. He claimed it as his own, caught fish with his hands, set snares for rabbits, cleaned his rifle every night by moonlight. Ellen's voice came to him in the darkness, soft, gentle, urging him to rest. "You've done enough, Josiah. Come home." He knew it wasn't real. Knew grief and exhaustion were playing tricks on his mind, but he answered anyway. Not yet. He found a tree near the shelter, an old oak with thick bark. Each night he carved a mark into the wood with his knife. 1 mark for each clansman he'd killed. He counted them sometimes, running his fingers over the cuts. 15 marks. 15 men who would never terrorize another family. 15 ghosts who haunted him less than Ellen's memory. The law had turned against him. The badge he'd worn meant nothing now, but he refused to surrender, refused to run. This was his county, too, his home, his land bought with blood and struggle. 3 weeks after he fled into the wilderness, Josiah heard something that made him go still. Cheers, distant but clear, coming from the direction of town. He moved through the forest carefully, following the sound. Torchlight flickered through the trees. A crowd had gathered near the courthouse steps, more people than he'd seen since the raid on Boone Plantation. Josiah crept closer, using the darkness as cover. He crouched behind a stand of brush and watched. A man stood on the courthouse steps, addressing the crowd. He wore fine clothes and a confident smile. His voice carried authority. The people cheered at his words, raising their fists in agreement. Then the man turned, and torchlight caught his chest. A badge gleamed there. Josiah's badge, the one he'd dropped on these very steps. The man wearing it was Samuel Wade. Morning came cold and gray. Josiah woke in the hollow with frost on his coat and hunger gnawing his belly. He'd slept poorly, haunted by visions of Wade wearing his badge, the symbol of everything he'd fought for now pinned to the chest of a traitor. He couldn't let it stand. The walk to town took hours. He moved carefully through the forest, avoiding main roads. Near the edge of the settlement, he found an abandoned shack and searched it for anything useful. In a corner he discovered an old, tattered coat, moth-eaten and filthy. Perfect. He shed his recognizable clothes and pulled on the coat, added dirt to his face, hunched his shoulders, became just another freedman broken by the times. The town square spread before him like a stage set for damnation. Banners hung from every building, white cloth emblazoned with red letters. Restoring white rule, Wade for sheriff, make Marston County pure again. A wooden platform stood in the center of the square, decorated with Confederate flags and Klan symbols. People gathered in the early light. White families claimed the best viewing spots. Shopkeepers set up tables selling food and drink, like this was a celebration. Children ran between adults, laughing, and freedmen stood in roped-off sections at the back, guards watching them with rifles, forced witnesses to their own subjugation. Josiah pulled his coat tighter and shuffled into the square. Nobody looked at him. Nobody cared about one more broken black man. He was invisible. He moved through the alleys behind the buildings, searching. Nathan Briggs lived above the old tannery. Josiah climbed the back stairs and knocked. 3 quick raps. Pause. 2 more. Their old signal. The door cracked open. Nathan's eyes went wide. Lord Jesus, they said you were dead. Not yet. Josiah pushed inside. Where's Isaac? Reuben? Isaac's hiding at his sister's farm. Reuben fled north, said he wanted no part of what's coming. Nathan studied Josiah's face. What are you planning? Justice. That ain't justice anymore, Josiah. That's suicide. Maybe, but I'm not dying alone. Josiah gripped Nathan's shoulder. You with me or not? Nathan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something hard had settled there. Ellen taught my daughter to read. I'm with you. They found Isaac at Dawn's Edge, chopping wood behind his sister's house. He didn't need convincing. The moment he saw Josiah, he dropped the axe and said, Tell me what you need. They gathered others quietly. Freedmen who'd lost family to the Klan. Men who remembered when Josiah's badge meant protection instead of persecution. By midday, they had 12 men willing to fight. Not enough to win a war, but enough for one last strike. Josiah drew plans in the dirt behind the tannery. Wade's rally starts at sunset. He'll be on that platform, surrounded by his people. We hit him there. They'll kill us all, one man said. Probably. Josiah looked at each face in turn. But we'll die on our feet, and we'll take that badge back. They spent the afternoon gathering supplies, oil barrels from the mill, rags for torches, every weapon they could find. When the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the square, they moved into position. The crowd had grown massive, hundreds of white faces, all eager to hear Wade promise a return to the old ways. The freedmen in their roped sections stood silent, heads down. Guards watched them with casual cruelty. Wade appeared on the platform as the sun touched the horizon. He wore fine clothes and a new hat. Josiah's badge gleamed on his chest like a trophy. The crowd erupted in cheers. Good people of Marston County. Wade's voice carried across the square. Too long we've suffered under northern tyranny. Too long we've watched our rightful order destroyed by carpetbaggers and their pets. More cheers. Josiah felt rage building in his chest, like pressure in a boiler. But tonight, we reclaim our heritage. Tonight, we restore white rule. Wade raised his fist. Tonight, we... Flames erupted near the platform. Oil barrels ignited in sequence, creating a wall of fire. Panic swept through the crowd. People screamed and scattered. Guards abandoned their posts to flee the heat. Josiah threw off his tattered coat and ran toward the platform. Nathan and Isaac flanked him, rifles raised. They cut through the chaos like avenging angels. Wade stumbled backward, shock on his face as Josiah climbed onto the platform. The firelight painted them both in hellish orange. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. "You," Wade breathed. Josiah crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He grabbed the badge and ripped it from Wade's chest, the pin tearing cloth. He slammed it against Wade's sternum hard enough to bruise. "You wore it for hate," Josiah said. His voice carried, despite the screams. "I wore it for justice!" Wade's hand went to his revolver. Josiah was faster. His gun cleared leather in a heartbeat, the shot echoing across the square. Wade's leg exploded in blood, and he collapsed screaming. Josiah grabbed him by the collar and dragged him off the platform. Wade clawed at the ground, leaving trails of blood. People ran in every direction now. Some tried to help Wade. Nathan and Isaac fired warning shots that sent them scattering. The lynching tree stood at the edge of the square, the same tree where this had all begun, where Caleb Turner had hung, where Josiah had vowed vengeance. He bound Wade's hands with rope and looped it over the branch. Wade whimpered, his leg useless beneath him. "Feel it," Josiah said quietly. "Feel what you did to us. What your kind has always done to us." He pulled the rope tighter, forcing Wade onto his toes. "This is justice." Wade's eyes were wide with terror. "Please, God, please." Did Ellen beg? Josiah's voice cracked. Did Caleb? Did any of them? His hand went to the lever that would drop Wade's support. One pull. That's all it would take. The gunshot came from somewhere in the fleeing crowd. Pain exploded in Josiah's side. He staggered, his hand leaving the lever. Blood spread across his shirt, hot and wet. He looked down stupidly at the wound, trying to understand. Around him, fire spread from the oil barrels to the banners. Flames climbed the Confederate flags. Smoke filled the air. The night erupted in screams and gunfire as freedmen fought guards, as Klansmen drew weapons, as the whole square descended into chaos. Josiah fell to his knees, pressing his hand against the wound. Blood pulsed between his fingers. Wade hung above him, sobbing. The badge lay in the dirt between them, catching firelight. Nathan appeared at his side. "Josiah, we have to move." But Josiah couldn't move. The world tilted sideways. Smoke and fire and screaming faces blurred together. Ellen's voice called to him from somewhere far away. "Come home." The world tilted and spun. Josiah tried to focus through the pain. Blood soaked his shirt, warm and sticky, spreading faster than seemed possible. His side felt like someone had pressed a hot iron against it. Each breath came shallow and sharp. Around him the square burned. People ran in every direction. Some helped fallen friends. Others fled into the darkness beyond the firelight. Gunshots cracked sporadically. Somewhere, a woman screamed for her child. Josiah's vision blurred. He pressed harder against the wound, but blood kept coming. His hand grew slick with it. Wade hung from the tree above him, still crying, still begging. The rope creaked with each movement. Josiah stared at him through the haze of pain and realized he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just emptiness. Nathan grabbed his arm. "Josiah, we need to go." "No." His voice came out weak. He pushed Nathan's hand away and looked across the square. The torch wagon sat near the platform, loaded with supplies for Wade's rally. Oil lamps, kerosene barrels, bundles of kindling meant to light the night in celebration. Now the wagon tilted sideways, its cargo spilling across the ground. A river of oil spread toward the flames, already consuming the banners. Perfect. Josiah began to crawl. His left side screamed protest with every movement. Blood left a trail behind him like a wounded animal. His vision darkened at the edges, but he kept moving. One hand forward, one knee, again. "What are you doing?" Isaac appeared beside him. "Let us carry you." "End it," Josiah gasped. His hand found his flint and steel in his coat pocket. "Have to end it." More freedmen gathered around him. They tried to lift him, but he fought them off with surprising strength. "No! Let me finish this." The oil slicked the ground beneath his hands. The smell of kerosene filled his nose, mixing with smoke and blood. He could feel the heat from the spreading fires, could hear wood crackling as flames consumed the platform where Wade had preached his hatred. His fingers closed around the flint. The steel felt cold and solid, real. He struck them together once, twice. Sparks fell into the oil. Nothing happened. He tried again. His hand shook badly now, blood loss making him weak. The world kept trying to spin away from him. Ellen's voice called from somewhere far off, but he couldn't make out the words. Third strike. The spark caught. Flame raced across the spilled oil like a living thing. It spread in every direction, following the trails of kerosene. Within seconds, the torch wagon erupted in a column of fire that reached toward the black sky. The heat pushed back the darkness. The roar drowned out the screams. Josiah collapsed onto his back, watching the flames climb. They consumed the Klan banners hanging from the buildings. They ate the Confederate flags. They turned Wade's platform into an inferno. Everything that had celebrated hatred and promised a return to bondage burned. Freedmen pulled him away from the spreading fire. He didn't resist this time. Didn't have the strength left. They carried him beyond the square, into the cool darkness of an alley. Nathan pressed cloth against his wound, but it did little good. "Stay with us," Nathan urged. "Hold on." Josiah tried to answer, but no words came. The pain had grown distant now, replaced by a strange floating sensation. He could still see the fires burning, could still hear the crackle and roar. Smoke rose in thick black columns that blotted out the stars. Wade's screams had stopped. Josiah didn't know if the man had died or simply fled. Didn't matter anymore. His hand found the badge in the dirt beside him. The metal felt cool against his palm despite everything burning around them. He'd fought so hard for this piece of tin, had killed for it, had lost everything for it. He thought about Ellen teaching children to read by candlelight, about Caleb hanging from that tree, about every person he'd buried along the way, all the blood, all the pain. Had it meant anything? The flames reflected in the badge's surface, dancing light that looked almost alive. "Promise me," he whispered to Nathan. His friend leaned close to hear. "Promise you'll keep them safe." "I promise." "Don't let it be for nothing." Nathan gripped his hand. "It won't be. I swear it won't be." Josiah closed his eyes. The heat from the fires warmed his face. Somewhere in the distance he heard horses, probably federal troops arriving too late as always. The sound faded as darkness pulled at him. Ellen's voice came clearer now, calling him home. He wanted to go to her, wanted to rest. But first the fires had to burn until nothing remained of the hatred that had poisoned this county, until the hoods and banners and symbols of oppression became ash scattered on the wind. The flames roared higher. Sparks drifted upward into the night like fallen stars returning to heaven. Josiah let the darkness take him. Dawn broke gray and cold over Marston County. Federal soldiers rode into town expecting battle. Instead, they found silence. The square lay in ruins. Charred wood and blackened earth stretched in every direction. Bodies lay scattered among the debris. Some burned beyond recognition, others shot or trampled in the chaos. White hoods littered the ground like discarded funeral shrouds. The courthouse stood as a blackened shell. Its windows gaped empty. Its doors hung crooked on twisted hinges. Inside, documents and records had turned to ash. Lieutenant Morrison dismounted and walked through the devastation. His men spread out, checking bodies, searching for survivors. They found few. Most had fled during the night. Those who remained huddled in their homes, afraid to emerge. Near the lynching tree, Morrison found a melted piece of metal, half buried in the scorched earth. He dug it free and turned it over in his hand. A badge, the star barely visible through the warped metal. "Sir?" A soldier approached. "We found where they took the bodies. 12 men died in the fighting, including the one they're calling the outlaw sheriff." Morrison looked at the ruined badge, looked at the burned square, looked at the empty rope still hanging from the tree. "Get me a full report," he said quietly. "Washington will want to know what happened here." I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.